started reading Toni Morrison's new remarkable book called The Source of Self-Regard. She has in here quotes from a diary from 1710 to 1712 by a man described as Virginia's most polished and ornamental gentleman. Virginia's most polished and ornamental gentleman. Here it is. February 8th, Jenny and Eugene were whipped. April 17th, Anaka was whipped. 5:13, Mrs. B was whipped. 3:23, Ma was whipped. 6:10, Eugene, a child, was whipped for running away and had the bit put on him. 9:3, I beat Jenny. 9:16, I beat Anama. 11:30, Eugene and Jenny were whipped. 12:16, Eugene was whipped for doing nothing yesterday. 7:1, the Negro woman ran away again with the bit on her mouth. 7:8, the Negro woman was found and tied, but ran away in the night. 9:15, my wife, against my will, caused little Jenny to be burned with a hot iron. 8:22, I had a severe quarrel with little Jenny and beat her too much, for which I was sorry. 8:31, Eugene and Jenny were beaten. 10:8, I whipped 3 slave women. 11:16, the Negro woman ran away again. Why did he do it? Because he could.
Hi, I'm Clive Gillinson, the Executive and Artistic Director of Carnegie Hall, and it's a very great honour to welcome you to this special edition of Live with Carnegie Hall, commemorating Juneteenth. We're joined today by the Reverend Dr. James A. Forbes Jr., President and Founder of Healing of the Nations Foundation and Senior Minister Emeritus at Riverside Church in New York. Dr. Forbes, wonderful to welcome you, and it means so much to all of us at Carnegie Hall to be able to mark this day with you.
Delighted to be with you.
Thanks. A year ago, your foundation presented an extraordinary Juneteenth event at Carnegie Hall. It was billed as the 5th annual Juneteenth celebration, and we were supposed to be gathering at Carnegie Hall again tonight. Tell us about the genesis of this event and how it actually arrived in Carnegie Hall last year and hopefully will live in Carnegie Hall for the future.
My beginning in interest in Juneteenth came because my wife, Betty, is a native of Texas, San Antonio, Texas. She used to tell me about how they celebrated Juneteenth, how they would go down to Breckenridge Park, all dressed up in festive clothes, eating, dancing, singing, having such a wonderful time. And I heard her talk about how the people gathered, and it meant so much that after 2.5 years following the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln, finally the word came that the slaves in Texas were free. She made it sound like such a wonderful celebration that while I was pastor at Riverside Church, I thought, a celebration that looks at the past and acknowledges the horror of it, but that also lifts up the hallelujahs of a day of freedom. That's an important conversation. Bittersweet, but moving in the right direction. So I decided to put on every year a service of celebration of Juneteenth, encouraging people to advance the cause of freedom for us all. Of course, when you are doing something at the famed Riverside Church, that's wonderful. But the idea of taking Juneteenth to Carnegie Hall, that was like everybody's dream because Carnegie Hall is the place of excellence, the place where you have worked so hard that finally you arrive, the place where people gather feeling that, in a sense, this is a royal venue. Ideas that are significant should have their run at Carnegie Hall. So we began a long time ago trying to make our way to Carnegie, and we were so grateful when you opened the doors last year to receive us of the Healing of the Nations Foundation. At long last, we had arrived at Carnegie Hall. You know, at Carnegie Hall, people like to say it's the ens realissimum, or they would say nous arrivons. So if you get there, then the idea has finally become a mainstream part of Americana.
Well, I mean, we're certainly thrilled to be partnering with you, hosting you, and, you know, and that you've arrived at Carnegie Hall. And Carnegie Hall, you probably know, is not just about music. I mean, some of the most extraordinary people have spoken there as well. So you're in remarkable company in every single way.
Thank you. Thank you.
In today's episode, we're going to hear some powerful words from Bishop Michael Curry, Bill Moyers, Carmen Perez, and Bree Newsom Bass from last year's event. Sadly, these words remain only too relevant today, perhaps even more so. Please could you give us some context of what Juneteenth was created to celebrate and what it means to you today?
Juneteenth celebrates that America spoke about being the land of the free, home of the brave, but we were really not fully free even as early as 1776. The 4th of July celebrates freedom from the crown. But many Black people were still enslaved during those days, which means that until Juneteenth, America's claim to be free was not the complete truth. For as long as slaves were bound, America could not fully claim to be free. So Juneteenth is actually the all-American Freedom Day. July 4th for some, but only Juneteenth could all Americans say, together we are free. Juneteenth is the acknowledgement of the evil of slavery, the acknowledgement that in addition to slavery itself, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, efforts were made to hold the slaves still captive in order that their labor might be enjoyed by others. So Juneteenth is the time to remind us of justice delayed. It's the time when at long last we lived up to the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, but this time for us all.
Absolutely. And it's absolutely true. I mean, nobody is free unless everybody is free. Couldn't agree with you more. In addition to the extraordinary speeches from last year, there were also some great musical performances as well. And I know we're going to have special remarks from Wynton Marsalis tonight, as well as you having a conversation with the remarkable chairman of our board, Robert Smith. I'm sorry we can't all be together at Carnegie Hall tonight, but thank you so much for celebrating this day with us virtually. It's always inspiring to speak to you, to hear you speak. And I'll now hand on to you to introduce Wynton and the rest of the episode. So thank you very much again.
Yes, thank you so very much. Wynton Marsalis. There is a man who, if you talk about freedom, has found a way to express it in ways that are felt not only by Black people, but by all people. Whether it is using second line music from his old New Orleans days, or whether it is jazz celebrating the new day, when Wynton plays and jazz at Lincoln Center gets the moving, everybody feels like we are Americans together. Hallelujah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. Thank you so much. In 1943, Duke Ellington took the Carnegie Hall stage for the first time. From 1943 to 1972, Duke played Carnegie Hall over 20 times. And from 43 to 48, he played consecutive years, and he premiered a new piece every year. Ironically, April 4th, 1968, the concert was introduced by civil rights leader Robert Moses with the announcement that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed a couple of hours earlier. And Duke and the band still played, of course, in tribute to Dr. King. Duke represents the very essence of excellence. His Carnegie Hall concert was met with great applause from the audience and mixed patronizing reviews from the intellectual community and the experts. They, of course, were used to condescending up to Duke, and that's a tradition that still continues. Just a couple of little points about Juneteenth is that the last battle of the Civil War was May 12th and 13th of 1865. It's called the Battle of Palmetto Hill. It's in Texas. And actually the Confederate Army won that battle. But a month and some change later, Juneteenth, and the news that everyone was indeed free. I have to go along with Dr. Forbes, whatever he says. He is truly a national treasure, and I'm honored to be following him in any context. Emancipation Celebration is the piece you're going to hear. And in this piece, Duke Ellington shows two sides of a story, the story of emancipation. The first side is people being happy that they're free and celebratory. That's the feeling of swing. And the second is a plaintive song of the older slaves who were given a de facto retirement on what Duke refers to as some other people's property. It was something that's known as that great getting up morning. The will to be free is celebratory. To realize the aspirations of democracy is celebratory. To be free is a celebration. That's why this is actually a time for a celebration. And Mr. Moore has a story that we heard a little earlier about the Negro woman who was always running away. We don't actually know why the master was whipping everybody, but we do know why she ran away. She had to. And that's why when we have these outbreaks every 40 or 50 years where the public just rises up to once again try to be the cradle of America and to make us live it, we come back and back again with more intensity. It's always a time for jubilation and for celebration, because one of these times when we do this, when we finish, we're going to actually be free as a nation, and we're going to make the sacrifices and the changes we need to make that 700,000 lives of the Civil War did not teach us enough to walk away from it. So this is a great time. I'm honored to be a part of it. Of course, Carnegie Hall is our nation's premier hall, fantastic place of so many great performances by so many orchestras and people. I'm honored, and I hope you enjoy our rendition of Emancipation Celebration.
In these last days, we have seen marches all across this country and around the world. And almost invariably, at some point, you will hear the words, "No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace." What does that mean? In all of the years of my protesting, when I've heard that, it has made some people think that this is a cry that vandalism will come, a cry that some breaking ins will take place, and all of the negative things often associated with protests. But in the spirit of Dr. King's marches, no justice, no peace was not a threat to vandalism or break-ins. It was a declaration of truth. The truth was that oppression, brutality, mean-spiritedness, and bigotry were abnormal elements in a civil society, and that those elements of unkindness and brutality meant that as long as such behavior occurs, there will be no tranquility in our spirits, no peace in our streets, no quality existence in the nation, no justice, no peace, declares that we cannot enjoy the American life with its promise of the pursuit of life and happiness. There is something about that phrase that says, enough, enough. Let us not even imagine that life can be normal until these travesties against human beings have been eliminated. So that's what I've been hearing. And I think what it says is now both black and white and brown are gathering together to acknowledge that truth, that until there is justice for all of us, there will be no peace in those who claim justice for themselves. Why is that so? I think the best way to answer that question is that I wrote a little poem that I think speaks to this fact that until all of us are free, none of us are free. And this is the poem. It's called One Family. Let's not resume a normality that's inhumane and insane. Efforts to heal abnormality will be spent in vain. Demons devised the illusions of supremacy. Was it a defect of spirit, mind, or destiny that made some folks vulnerable to such barbarity? How could a whole society be built on such a lie, downgrading Africa's sons and daughters as slaves to buy, or designating poor white souls to be of lesser breed, perpetuating an underclass that could not succeed, permitting some to amass and hoard inordinate wealth, leaving others scrambling for jobs, shelter, food, and health? Can't you see how wicked and weird is this brutal system? No decent person with self-respect should be its victim. All races should be praying for deliverance from this shame, from bigotry, violence, and oppression in our name. The virus is teaching us that only in mutuality will we survive and keep hope alive as one family. I think that's related to no justice, no peace. Last year, in our program on Juneteenth, we were able to offer to two women who are stalwart in the battle for justice. We give each year at our Juneteenth event the Spirit Alive Award. Two extraordinary women last year were recipients of that award. Bree Newsom Bass and Carmen Perez, who have constantly engaged in the effort to make sure that there be no hesitation and no delay in bringing justice to us all.
I give thanks first and foremost to Jesus Christ for every good thing I have done in my life, including removing the Confederate flag in South Carolina. Thank you to the Healing of Nations Foundation for this honor and for inviting me to share this wonderful evening with all of you. Thank you to my family members who are here supporting me today and every day. My husband, Marcus Bass, who is my favorite accomplice in starting good trouble. My parents and my godmother, who instilled in me the importance of taking a stand for truth and justice. My nieces and cousins who came here to be with me tonight, and my family and friends who are supporting and watching from home. I dedicate this honor to the memory of my ancestors who were enslaved in the Carolinas, those whose names I know and those I don't. And finally, I dedicate this to the many generations of abolitionists, past and present, the true freedom fighters of America who are continuing this fight today, who refuse to be neutral in situations of injustice, who refuse to be cowed into silence by forces of structural racism and white supremacy, who refuse to stop fighting until this nation is truly free and truly recognizes the humanity and rights of every individual. Thank you, and God bless.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Reverend Dr. James Forbes, Jewel, and the Healing of the Nations Foundation for this honor. I also want to thank my dear brother, Kirsten, who has been on the front lines with us for so many years.
Not that long.
Yes, so many years. You see the baldness. But I thank you because you have protected us. You walk along our side, you encourage us, you call us when we're feeling down. And so thank you. It is a privilege to receive the Spirit Alive Award along with Bree Newsom Bass and Bishop Michael Curry. As a Latina, I'm extremely humbled and honored to receive this recognition on this day and recognize that the Black struggle has paved the way in this country for movements and activism to exist. Not only for me, but for my family. To stand here in front of you, I have a responsibility. Not only to do this work, but to build the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. I am committed to centering Black liberation, and I also welcome my Latinx communities to do the same. I truly believe that once Black people are free, my people will be free as well. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to be here with you. I want to thank you for the recognition of this work, which I do not do alone, but with the support of many, many who are here with me today. My team, my mentor, Harry Belafonte, my Gathering for Justice and Justice League family, my partners, my family, my mother who is here with me. We just lost my father 2 months ago. And so my mother has traveled to New York with me. And so thank you. Gracias, Ama, por darme la oportunidad de ser quien soy yo. And especially my husband, Jay Jordan. Movements are made by the power of our love and support for each other. And when we come together, change becomes inevitable. Thank you for this honor. And so I want to say that I accept this recognition on behalf of my son, whose great-great-great-grandmother was a slave, and who she, because of her strength and her belief in freedom, he's allowed to be here with all of us today. And so may the marathon continue.
Jim Forbes may have forgotten this, but sometimes before he asked me to be here this evening, he pulled me aside at a Riverside Church event and asked me a question. Almost in a whisper, he asked me, when democracy dies, when democracy cries, I can't breathe. How do we answer? How do we answer, Bill, when democracy cries, I can't breathe? I couldn't answer. I was tongue-tied. But now I can. Juneteenth here tonight is the answer. Juneteenth says, tell the truth, strip the whitewash from our history, and tell our story. Because democracy can't die of too many lies. Remember Angela and little Jenny and those 3 unnamed slave women, and tell the story about what happened to them that they cannot tell themselves. Tell the truth, tell the story, and sing. Sing to celebrate freedom. Juneteenth tells us it's a long, long road to freedom. You have to sing when you're weary, when roadblocks loom and potholes open and the devil himself straddles the road across the front of you, pitchfork raised and leering. You have to sing, even if you can't carry a tune. Even the flattest notes can carry hope. Let's sing.
is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For years now, I have heard the word wait, It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging dart of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of 20 million Negro brothers smoldering in the airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, then you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky when you are humiliated by day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored, when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with the inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a denigrating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. Dr. Smith, I call you Dr. Smith, they call you Mr. Smith, but anyway, I'm delighted to have this privilege to talk with you. Last year, when we came to do our 5th of the activities of Juneteenth, it was the most glorious moment that I can remember it in any time during my pastorate at the Riverside Church. So thank you so very much for joining with us to recapitulate, to look back over that wonderful time.
Absolutely.
But since that time, we've looked forward to being back for our 6th year, had made plans, but of course, everybody knows the virus came up and we are not able to be there in person, but it is good to at least be able to be in exchange in this way. So I would like very much to ask you, I mean, everybody is trying to figure out where we're going from here, how will we respond to the pandemic? And then while we are wrestling with that problem, here comes the situation of George Floyd and the movement and the marches through the street. And before we can get over that, here comes another. But I'd like to ask you, as a man of color, how do you respond to all that's going on? And how do you see yourself in the context of these struggles?
That's a great question. As an African-American man, I have to think about rising to the occasion. And that occasion is to fight for economic and social justice for our people, for all people who have been disenfranchised and systemically disenfranchised, and to use the powers and platform that I have, A, to inform, B, to motivate, and if possible, which is what we're focused on now, how do we eradicate racism in this country in a way that creates a greater opportunity for all Americans, and to ensure that African Americans have an equal opportunity as every other American to participate in the social, economic fabric of this country. So my job is to use whatever platforms and means and voice at my disposal, as I said, to educate, inform, and to hopefully, move people in a way that they take action and eradicate what is one of the worst plagues that has ever hit our planet, which is racism.
Yes, you are an icon of philanthropy, caring for the community, etc. Has it always been that you were at the position where you could look down on the struggles of the rest of the people, or do you know anything about that struggle yourself?
I live and have lived that struggle every day. It's kind of an interesting moniker of looking down. You know, I am very pleased to have been born into a family that was part of a community, that was part of a neighborhood of African Americans who were very thoughtful about the raising of the children in the next generation and the caring that's required as neighbors for each other and each other's plight. Growing up, my parents were both educators. My mother grew up in Washington, D.C. My father grew up in Denver, Colorado. And we lived in a neighborhood where we had, you know, African Americans of all socioeconomic classes, from those who were in, you know, dire straits of housing assistance environments to those who were professionals, who were dentists and business owners. And, you know, we all had similar challenges of racism. We all had similar challenges of, you know, trying to ensure that the children in our neighborhood, A, had enough to eat, B, had educational opportunities that prepared them for school, and while in school, opportunities to excel, to build their own character, the nature of who they were to become, to support each other. You know, when some of us had opportunities to go off to college, when some of us had a chance to return with graduate degrees, and as we watched some of our young men in the 60s go off to war, and some not returning. There was great thought and empathy, concern, consideration, and giving. You know, many in the community, including my parents, were focused on building out Head Start programs, after school and before school, meal programs, focused on ensuring that the teachers in our neighborhood were getting equal pay for the equal work. And I remember being 6 and 7 years old, 8 years old, on teacher strikes with my parents, and my father, who was a principal, stood up for the teachers and stood up for their right to be paid equally and be paid on par with white teachers. We worked together in ensuring that when desegregation hit our school systems, and even though some racists burned 1/3 of the buses that were being used in the forced busing dynamic, people banded together to ensure that as many kids as possible would be able to participate in an education system that had equal dollars spent, which meant we had to go across town in order to be educated. And I think about that, and I think about my father, who was focused on ensuring that the local YMCA had adequate funding and capacity so the young African-American men and women had a chance to experience the outdoors, had places to build their minds and their bodies, to go to the mountains, to experience the freedom that brings, and to participate in music programs. We had a number of music teachers in the neighborhood. Mrs. Buckner was the one who taught me how to play the piano. And my father played the piano and organ, you know, for hours on the weekends, and people would stop by to listen to him play. And the liberation that comes from music, the liberating of the human spirit in the performing of it, the teaching of it, the participating in it, in bands, concert bands, jazz bands, etc., and to ensure that, you know, children in the neighborhood who wanted to play an instrument had access to one, who had access to music lessons. All of that is part of the struggle. And there are pains along the way of losing family members to racist acts. There were pains along the way of losing family members to acts of war. There are pains along the way of many of our elders not having equal opportunity in the jobs and not getting the jobs that they were more than qualified for. And I remember more than one conversation in the living room in that context. And we fought on, and we continue to fight on. And we are looking now at a chance again to continue to bend this arc of the universe towards a more just society. And that's what we do.
Yes, you know, as we observe you, you've been blessed. Many of our brothers and sisters have been blessed in material ways. What I'd like to know from you is what is it that made it your commitment not only to be blessed, but to be a channel of blessing? So, really, what I want to know is how do you account for the development of a philanthropic spirit that has become your trademark?
It is a function of being raised in a community that views itself as a community. And I was raised that way. So it isn't something that developed. It was the way that it happened. I tell stories about when we would come home from school from these long bus rides, and both my parents were working teachers, and Mrs. Brown would accept us into her home. And her older children, they were a few years older, would help us with our homework. And she made sure we had nutritious food to eat while we were doing those things. And, you know, it was when I started with my brother, a lawn mowing business and a shoveling snow business. After we did ours, we went and did Mrs. Busby's, and we did Mr. Moore, who was one of the founders of the Pullman Porters Union. And we go do theirs free. And then my father said, after you do that, then you can go raise money, or you can go and, you know, shovel the walk for other people for money. But it was clear in my household that the most important thing that you can do is contribute meaningfully to your community. And if you do that, there's a great wealth that comes from those acts. And that's how we behave. That's how we raise our children today. That's how our community remained strong. And I think that's just a function of who we are as a people.
It has occurred to me that the word philanthropy usually has to do with people with great wealth, but something of an altruistic spirit seems to be necessary if we're going to deal with the crisis we are seeing as people are marching through the street, especially with the issue of police brutality, other forms of injustice. So the issue of trying to figure out how do you take the people who are marching today, who are protesting, who are saying Black Lives Matter. Well, if you feel that way, what is it that makes us not only talk about it, but do something about it? I have a story to tell you about you. The Father Divine used to say that other preachers preach, but his job was to tangibilitate the gospel. Many people talk about altruism and mutuality, but you tangibilitate generosity. So I think it's not just enough to march. Folks are going to have to do something before we begin to reduce the inequities in our society. What is it that's going to make people not only talk about it, talk about justice, but to be willing to take their power, their influence, and do something concretely about justice? What is it going to take to bring that change about?
It's a great narrative. It's a great question. And I always remind my people in my organizations and the young people I get a chance to talk to quite frequently that you do what you are capable of doing, and you stretch beyond that. If what your capacity yields is you're going to take care of someone's child when they come home from school until they get them or read a book to them because they're working and then that's what you do. If you can influence business leaders and world leaders to the inequities and how those inequities, you have to speak in some cases the language that they understand, that has to change, then that's what you do. And so everyone has to work with the platforms that have been made available to them, either by divine invitation or through hard work. And you should use that platform to its fullest extent. I happen to have been, successful in a world of investing and been successful in a world of engineering. And for whatever reason, I have the ability to see certain systemic changes that can occur. And I have the great fortune to be around people who can help make that occur. And so my job is to communicate that. is to communicate it to the various organizations that I am associated with in a language that they understand, because I've been taught part of that language, the language of business, the language of philanthropy, the language of change, and the language of how to be an anti-racist, and to put those all together to communicate at levels that work, and also communicate to the young people who I'm so proud of, who Dr. Forbes decided not just to talk, but decided to get out there and put their bodies in the way of unfortunate harm, but in the way of justice, and saying this cannot stand. The world stood quiet for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with the murder of George Floyd that made us all look inside ourselves and say, this is not right. And he was on a string of a number of African Americans who were brutally murdered, you know, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And the world has said enough. And then we saw the allies in the United States, which is something we didn't see as much in the 60s, where white Americans, our brown American brothers, decided this is enough for everyone. We need to make these changes. And then we saw people from all around the world saying, this is unfair and this is not right. And then they started to use their platform. In some cases, their platform was in the street. In some cases, their platform is using philanthropic dollars. In some cases, it's influencing the executives of the corporations and institutions and administrations and Congress folks. And that's what it takes. It takes people really getting back in touch with their humanity, their moral center, and saying, we need to make a change and let me do what I am capable of. I'm 17 years old. I don't have any resources, but I have my feet, I have my voice, I can make a sign, I can join in solidarity. Or it's 60-year-old executive saying, I'm going to make a change at my company in the way that we are doing our recruiting, our training, our hiring, our advancement, our utilization of supply chains to support African-American businesses so they can create more economic freedom in their community. Or it's people saying, let me use the institutions that gather these executives together and think about systemic solutions that are long-lasting and sustainable. And so that's what's different about it this time. But what's the same about it? It is truly arcing into the moral center of all Americans, and not arcing, but connecting us and saying we are all humanity. We are all human beings. We're 99.9% different. We're not going to focus anymore on this 0.1%. And let us create a sustainable, just world and economy that we all can participate in and feel proud about ourselves in being those sorts of human beings.
Yes, I'd like to ask you about this. I'm a preacher, and I don't know much about your background in that regard, but it feels to me that the next phase of the movement has got to be a change of heart. I mean, we can protest and we can do all of this, but at the end of the day, the heart has to be ready to embrace the fact that we are one family, that we are connected together in that way.
Amen to that. Amen to that. I agree.
Okay.
And you have to think about what connects the heart. Music connects the heart. Feelings connect the heart. Words connect the heart. And we need to use those vehicles to connect every heart. And let's bet on love. Let's double down on love. And let's expand love in the way we treat each other and in the way we move the organizations that we have influence over, so that that connectivity becomes ever more tangible.
It's very fascinating. I had written a little poem about love. So to have you bring it in, that opens the door for me to just read this. And I think it
Looking
gets
forward
to
to
the
it.
spirit you're talking about. It's called The Vaccine of Love. Stop the virus of hate from spreading across the land. Bigotry is a deadly weapon the nation cannot stand. The isms of division and the seeds of fear will start an epidemic throughout the atmosphere. The spirit of our nation is desperately pleading today. This is our blue-green planet. Don't let hatred take it away. So here's the chorus. Take the vaccine of love in a hurry. Let's spread it far and near. Teach it and preach it everywhere until the air is clear. That sounds like is it saying an amen to what you've just said about love.
I love it. I'm going to encourage you to take it to my good friend John Baptiste and have him set that to music. I think it will be lyrical and violent. So,
all right, good. So good to talk with you and look forward to seeing your continued example. And may many of us follow that example if we're going to change this nation and make it what it ought to be.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. It's always a pleasure. And thank you so much for doing all the great work that you do and leading in the ways that lead with the heart and with love.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My best. All the best. Thank you.
We've got to find a way to heal our country. Jesus told the parable to teach us that we need a revival of relationships. Relationships, oh, stay with me, you will get quiet on me now, I'm in trouble. Relationships across difference. Relationships with people we don't like. Relationships with people we disagree with. We need a revival in this country of relationships. Jesus said you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, which means, Democrats, you got to love a Republican neighbor. Help me, somebody. Conservatives, you got to love a liberal neighbor, right? Those of y'all who watch Sean Hannity, you got to love somebody who watched Rachel Maddow. Love your neighbor. Oh, yeah. Straight folks, love your LGBTQI plus neighbor. Love your neighbor. Christian, love your Buddhist neighbor. Muslim, love your Jewish neighbor, and on and on and on. We must find a way to build relationships again across color divides, across religious divides, across political divides. We must rebuild America. You read this parable of the Good Samaritan, it's deep, because the brother, not only did he call for a revival of relationships, Jesus called for a revival of values that they already shared. He asked the lawyer at the beginning, when the lawyer said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, what did Moses say? What's in the Torah? What's in the ancient tradition and wisdom of Judaism? What's already there? What are the values that we actually share? And I want to submit and suggest that we will begin to heal this nation when we rebuild relationships again, and when we restore the values that we already share together. Oh. I remember years ago reading this book called Everything I Learned in Kindergarten. And in the book, the brother had a list of things that he learned in kindergarten. He said, these are the things I learned. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. I want y'all to share these with the Congress of the United States. All right, y'all, everybody together now? Put things back where you found them. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that don't belong to you. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Take a nap every afternoon. And when you go out into the world, watch out for traffic, hold on, and stick together. Old slaves used to say it this way, walk together, children, and don't you get weary, because there's a great camp meeting in the promised land. We've got some shared values as a nation. We must reclaim them, and we must live by them and transform this nation by them. We hold these truths to be self-evident. that all men, all folk are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh, we got some shared values. The truth is, if we would reclaim them, claim the values of Emma Lazarus and that Statue of Liberty when we debate what must happen at our borders. Give me your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Well, I'm going to sit down now. When I went off to school, my daddy, when we were kids, used to always quote Jesus in Matthew 7. We know it as the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. When Jesus said that, he was actually building on what Rabbi Hillel had taught a century before. What is hurtful to another, to you, do not do to another. This is the whole Torah. Everything else is just commentary. And so I was getting ready to go off to college, and I was in the car with my daddy, and he said, you know, when you go off to school, I want you to remember one thing. And I was, 17 or 18, so I was I'm sure I was rolling my eyes. And he said, I want you treat every girl the way you want somebody else to treat your sister. Now, I knew what he meant, but I have to remember, I remember thinking, you know, you have just ruined 4 years of college. I was going to be away from you and grandma and everybody else, and I was just going to be, you know, John Shaft. I mean, I was just, you know. But I knew what he was talking about because he used to say that to us when we were kids. Treat every girl the way you want somebody else to treat your sister. Treat every boy the way you want somebody else to treat your brother. Treat every woman the way you want somebody to treat your mother. Treat every man the way you want them to treat your father. Treat them the way you want your own family to be treated. Show them the honor, the respect, the dignity that you want for your own family. But don't just stop there. Then go out and work for a society in this country and a world where every man, woman, and child is treated as a child of God, both in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the law. And don't you give up and don't you quit until everybody is equal. Everybody shares in this bounty. And every man, woman, and child is a child of God in this country. Heal this country. Heal this world. And don't you give up and don't you get weary. Walk together, children, because there's a great camp meeting in the promised land. God love you. God bless you. And God keep you.
Thank you so very much for joining with us and looking back at the last Juneteenth. And even though we are not able to be together, making sure that we did not let this year pass, but that we would renew our dedication to being one nation under God this year. We hope that next year we will all be gathering again at Carnegie Hall in our festive attire, ready to hear the best music in the world, hearing speakers that inspire our hearts to new endeavors, as well as to honor people who have been stalwarts in the work of justice throughout the year. Now, the Healing of the Nations Foundation will be working throughout the year. Our work goes much deeper than the annual Juneteenth celebration. Healing of the Nations is working with passion and purpose to effect change in minds, hearts, and spirits. We need your help to make a difference. Please visit our website, www.healingofthenationsfoundation.org. Help us to sustain our vigilance and our vitality in bringing justice to us all, so that when we gather again next year, we'll actually be able to say together in sincerity, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you.